Okay, in part 3, I said that if you could stare at this forever and nothing would happen. That's not entirely true. I found out on that Japanese website I mentioned earlier that you can actually get something to happen here, and it's really silly, and it's a real big waste of your time. But I figured I'd go ahead and show it to you in this little bonus part. Now, I'm not going to make you wait the whole time. That would just be ridiculous. Right now I've got the turbo button on my emulator held down, and it goes about, I'd say about 20 times faster than real time. Even so though, this part we're at right now, up to when the screen changes, which you'll see in a little bit, is a whole hour in real time. So it takes about 2 to 3 minutes before it changes, even with the turbo button pressed now. Now, as I've said before, Takeshi's Challenge is a parody of old school video games. And I think this is intended to be a parody of how back in the 80s game developers like to come up with gimmicks for copy protection. Now, one of the most infamous gimmicks of all time was with the Nintendo game on the NES, Star Tropics. Great game and everything, but you would get to a certain point fairly close to the end of the game. You've played for hours and hours, and then the game would tell you to dip your uncle's letter in water. And, you know, what does that mean? You know, what are they talking about? What letter? Well, in the instruction manual, there is a letter from your uncle. A literal letter printed out in the instruction manual. You have to tear it out, dip it in water, and then a number will appear on the message. The number was 747. I'll never forget that until the day I die, because I played this game when I was a child, Star Tropics, and I had to rent it. And of course, when you rent games, you don't get the instruction manual, or you get a damaged instruction manual. The first person that rented this game probably did the letter thing, so the letter wasn't there. And I had no way of figuring out this 3-digit code. So, you know, I was screwed. And then, you know, to add insult to injury, after I took the game back, the very next month, Nintendo Power printed the code in their Counselor's Corner section. I'll never forget that. Really one of the dumbest things that any game developer's ever done, in my opinion. We're just about to come up on the first transition now. That brings us to the end of today's broadcast. Wonderful. And that's not the only transition. We've got another one coming up, and this one you have to wait in real time for 3 hours. And if I actually made you wait the whole time, that would be, you know, 8-9 minutes of waiting. And I'm not that cruel. I'm going to make you wait a little bit because I want you to go through some of the pain I had to go through. But yes, 3 whole hours of staring at nothing but a black screen at this point. And the only thing you can do is reset, you know, and start the game over. You either have to stare at this screen or start the game over. And, you know, back on the subject of the whole copy protection parody thing, the only problem with my theory, as you might have figured out already, is that Star Tropics came out in 1990, which is about 4 years after Takeshi's Challenge came out. I still don't think that's a disqualifying fact to my theory, though, because there were a lot of goofy gimmicks back in the day. I mean, a lot of them were things like code wheels that, you know, if you lost the code wheel, you were screwed. I know there was at least one computer game that had like a physical dongle you had to plug up to your computer. You know, things like that. So it's not outside of the realm of possibility. I think it's actually fairly likely that Takeshi was making fun of these gimmicks when he came up with this. And really, I hope that's the case, because the alternative, quite frankly, is just too distressing to think about. The idea that somebody would come up with something like this with no inspiration whatsoever. I'd just rather ignore that possibility. Thank you very much. Still waiting for the next transition. Another thing I'd like to talk about while we're just sitting here waiting is a lot of people like to talk about how bad this game is. The famous Japanese gaming magazine Famitsu ranked this game as #1 in their Kusoge game list. Kusoge is Japanese for shitty game. This is the all-time bad game, according to Japanese gamers. And really, you know, the funny thing is, this game's not that bad. It really isn't. It's not good. It's not even okay. It is a bad game. It's just not the worst game. I mean, not even... Oh, yeah. There's the second transition. Very funny, Takeshi. Anyway, as I was saying, you know, it's not even the worst commercial game. Not even the worst game that appeared on retail shelves that people could buy. Even back then, I don't think it was the worst game. I think the big part of it is that it sold so many units despite being a bad game. That's the reason why all these Japanese people remember it. If it weren't for Takeshi's involvement, this game wouldn't have sold any copies. It was just because of him that they sold 800,000 units. There have been other games that are I've played, and I've played a lot of games. I've played just about every NES and Famicom game that can be played by someone with no Japanese knowledge and understood by someone with no Japanese knowledge. And the worst game I can think of that I've ever played, and it makes this game look brilliant, it's a game called Mirai Shinwa Jarvis. It translates to Distant Legend of Jarvis or something like that. That game is what you really need to point at when you want to talk about a bad game. And of course, the really funny thing is that game was also made by Taito. I think it was 1987. And in fact, parts of the game look kind of similar to this game. But it was basically an RPG. You're supposed to be like this Earthling who went out into space, was, you know, cryogenically frozen for thousands. It's like Planet of the Apes. It's a big rip-off of Planet of the Apes. And the idea was that you had to take over the Earth and bring back civilization, more or less. And it was an awful, awful game. I mean, so terrible. So many things in it didn't work. The armor didn't work in this game. I really shouldn't be getting off on a rant about another game, but I can't help it. You know, it's just, this game is not as bad as people make it out to be. It's not a good game, but we have to keep things in context here. So, now after that little rant, I think we're finally up on the last transition. Just a few more seconds, and we'll get to see the big surprise. Good morning. There you go. 5 hours total, and now you're ready to play the game again. Go to hell, Takeshi Kitano.